Hello, and welcome to the gym. It's time to talk about Transformation Tuesday. We're going to be talking about the gap in the gain today. It's going to be a crunchy, creamy, chewy show. So this is Growing Your Mindset with Adam Diaz and Justin Hook. We're so excited to have you guys with us this morning. So excited to see you there, Deborah. How are you? And Brian and everybody else who's watching. Adam, take us away, brother.
What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Hope you had an amazing motivational Monday yesterday talking about Rocky. Hope you had the eye of the tiger all day. But today we are going to be transformed. We're going to be transformed with the gap and the gain. This is one that we mentioned this a lot in here, right? We mentioned this concept, the gap and the gain. What's up, Angie? What's going on? That's what I figured.
Sorry,
I know.
Angie.
Hopefully Dom's doing better. Hopefully you guys are doing better. Our prayers, our thoughts go out to you guys. Stay well. Today we are getting into the gap in the gain, and we talk about this subject quite a bit because it's been such a big part of my life now, and that it's kind of interwoven in everything now. And hopefully you'll be able to see this after we finish with this episode. If you're not familiar with this concept, we're going to break it down. We're going to talk a little bit about it, some ways that we've applied it in our lives, and a little bit of pro tips that can help you stay in the gain and stay out of the gap.
Let's go.
Let's go. So for you guys that don't know about the gap and the gain, this is a book. I think it was 2021, 22 that it came out. It's relatively new. The concept was a concept that had been formulating by strategic coach owner Dan Sullivan, who is the co-author of The Gap and the Gain with Dr. Benjamin Hardy, who
Now,
we talk
just
about a
to
lot here.
stop you real quick. I still don't understand what a clothing store has to do with the audio volume on an instrument. But no, the gap and the gain. Okay, it didn't hit very well. My jokes are dad jokes, so you got to bear with me there.
It was almost good. It was almost good.
It was really bad. It landed so flat. I don't think I've told a joke that bad since second grade. Like I mean, there was no at the end of
Yeah,
that
we'll
one.
have
It
to
was
get some
just
sound
so
effects and a laugh track. But yeah, so this idea of the gap and the gain, we have this from Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy, who also wrote Who Not How, which is also another phenomenal book about how to level up your life in ways that you don't have to do at all, because we can't. And the gap and the gain is also another concept that Ben Hardy and that Dan Sullivan have come up with. And the whole thing about Who Not How was that this was a concept that Dan Sullivan would promote in his strategic coaching program, but he was not an author. He wasn't an author. And so we have Ben Hardy come onto the scene. And this is where Dan Sullivan's like, okay, you're going to be my who to write this book, to write these concepts. And they actually went in with a three book deal. And the gap and the gain is the second one. And so this idea of the gap and the gain has been so instrumental in my life. I believe it was the very end of last year that I was hearing about this. There's a buzz. Oh, yeah, the gap, the gain, this thing. And it was Keston and the group coaching that I was a part of back last year. And I think in the beginning of the year, January, I picked up this book, The Gap and the Gain. And I read it through, listened to it through on Audible, and then again and again. And I listened to it 4 times in a row, Justin, before before I changed off to another book. This is how I guess critical I felt like it was for me in my life, and I needed to hear it more and more.
Now I only listened once, but it's been pretty impactful. I mean, we reference it enough on the show that people know have a sense that there's something impactful here.
Yeah.
And the fact that I've been able to take and look at circumstances, and basically I've used it more for recovering, because it's so easy to get into living in or focusing on the gap, that that to just have this knowledge and go, okay, you know what, there's another perspective I can take is super helpful.
And and so for a little bit of background, I've read, listened to probably close to 150 books over the last 3 years, and just a ton of books all the time. And this was one of those books, because a lot of these, when you're reading these self-help books over and over, you start hearing the same stories, you start hearing the same ideas, you start seeing all these commonalities. And this one kind of was the concept that I feel like was the overarching concept over all of them. And I think it's such a simplistic concept that once you get it and you start to practice it and internalize it, it will benefit every aspect of your life because it's so simple. It's one of those things that you don't even, it doesn't take much effort to think about it, to be triggered, to become aware of it, and to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And to just be able to take the concept. I mean, it's not as simple of a concept as like the 5 second rule, where, yeah, you do need to read the book if you want to catch the nuance and get the motivation. And it is a tremendous book. I'd recommend that one as well.
Mhm.
But you can pick up the whole concept and really be, you know, um, r- really pretty much master it, even just having a summary of the book. And I guess you sort of can with the gap and the gain as
Oh
well,
yeah.
but it is
Oh yeah.
definitely more of a, there is more nuance to it.
Let's break it down. So
Let's
what is
go
the
for it.
gap? What is the gain? Because it has nothing to do with clothing, nothing to do with audio. But it is something that has to do with everything. It really does. It really does. And so a lot of times I went through my life thinking I was an optimist. I was a glass half full kind of guy. You can ask anybody that knew me in my past. Now I was a very positive type of person until I read The Gap and the Gain. And then I realized actually how negative of an outlook that I had so often. And so the whole thing is, so Dan Sullivan is coaching. Has a group coaching there. He has entrepreneurs, high level entrepreneurs come in, and they're talking about their wins. And so Dan Sullivan is mentioning to one of his students, one of his clients, that oh, look at these wins, look how far you've gone. And he would say, yes, yes, but I'm still not where I want to be, and this kind of thing. And he never would accept the win. And it kind of started getting annoying to Dan. And he was like, do you see what you're doing here? And so he starts spelling it out, and we will in just a moment. But the guy, you know, it was because of this idea that we so often do. How often um, do you detract from a win by saying, well, I'm still not where I want to be yet? And this is the idea of the gap. And so the gap is where we have an ideal, this picture of where we want to be in the future, the finish line, farther off, these benchmarks that we want. However, when we set these goals to accomplish these things and we're moving forward to them, a lot of times we won't look at back at the accomplishments, but we'll just see how far we still have to go. And so it's like, oh, this is taking so long. I'm not where I want to be. A lot of dissatisfaction can happen from it. And this is the gap, right? We're living, our mind, our focus is on the place that we haven't got to yet. And so there's this huge gap still. And so the gain is the converse of that, right? The gain is looking back, measuring backwards, and saying, okay, look at all the progress that I've made. And then you have a whole different reaction.
Right, right. Here's the thing: when we're driving, we look way off into the distance so that we can see everything in front of us. But when we have gap thinking, what we're doing is we're looking way off into the distance, but it's like with a with a telescope, so that we can't see anything between that gap and where we're going. So it's counterproductive. It's not helping us to actually bridge that gap. It's not helping us to get out of that gap. Instead, what it's doing is it's causing us to get upset, frustrated, nervous, worried, all these negative
Mhm.
emotions, because we so desperately want to be at that mountain peak. We so desperately want to be out of the gap. But then what happens as soon as we somehow manage to achieve any success along the way, we dismiss it rather than celebrate it because, well, we still haven't made it to the mountain peak.
Yeah.
And I think we should take a lesson from professional football. What do you hear professional football players say? And if you don't hear them say it, I'll tell you. They say, we're focusing on one win at a time.
Yeah.
One win at a time. And so they'll often say things like, okay, this week we are 0-0, and at the end of this game we're going to be 1-0. They've made it smaller. It's still gap thinking, because they're looking towards the end of that game, and it needs to be a win for them to be satisfied. But it's at least they're able to celebrate those wins.
Yeah, and I think you said something right there about emphasis, right? It's what we're focusing on, right? And this makes all the difference, because the gap in the gain is just two sides of the same coin. And so it's all about perspective. And when we looking at my life, 6 months in, I guess, from reading The Gap in the Gain and trying to really apply these things in my life, to the point where, my kids are understanding those concepts. But when we're looking at what we're emphasizing is, are we thinking about the positive things, or are we thinking about the negative things? We talk about these kind of things a lot, as far as, what are the thoughts and the focused emphasis that is going to benefit us. We can look at life so many different ways. We can look at it as it's scarce. There's a lot of scarce resources. There's not enough to go around. And we will have that kind of this idea, this part of the gap thinking. However, we can look at things a different way, and we can see our wins, and we can see what all the blessings we have, and be filled with gratitude. Gratitude is one of the major components of living in the game.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because living in the gain, part of living in the gain is having that perspective um, of of celebration for the things that have been done right to get us to the point where we are right
Yeah.
now. And the fact is there's so many things. I mean, you think about it. Um, you know, they say there's no moral victories in sports, and what they're saying is, hey, it's a win-loss business. You make money if you win, you make less money if you lose. But that's the whole point. You make less money if you lose. So whether you win or whether you lose, it's still a win. I mean, we don't need players figuring that out.
Yeah.
We want them to win for us. But there's that idea there that, I mean, imagine the quarterback, for example, who throws 3 touchdowns, has no interceptions during the game. He's showing clear improvement week to week. They don't get the win. They lose by a little. A gap thinking quarterback is like, man, I'm so much closer to winning these games because look at how better I'm playing.
Yeah.
Look at all the strides and advances that I'm taking. Look at and yeah, we could criticize that from an aspect of saying, well, yeah, but football's a win and loss thing, but it's not necessarily.
Right.
You want to. You want to celebrate those wins along the way. I mean, if you don't celebrate those wins along the way, it is the opposite of gratitude.
Sure. And a lot of times we can get distracted by things that are shouldn't be on our radar, or that can suck us into that gap thinking. For instance, one of my middle daughters, my 12-year-old, she has a friend that gave her a custom cup. It was one of those tumblers with pictures on it, and he wanted to give it to her in a special way. And so he came over to our workplace with his father, and he told me he got me involved with this whole scavenger hunt. I had to set these things up all over my house, and these clues, and this whole thing. And you should have seen her face. She was elated. She was having to figure out these clues, and couldn't figure them out. And then she's like, ah, and then, so long story short, she finds this cup, and she's so happy. And then he gave her some other little present, some other thing that she wanted to open up and play with. All the other kids are coming in with this excitement. 10 minutes later, she's snapping at everybody, she's yelling, and she's like, get away from all my stuff, and you're messing up all my things. And before this, it was like she was just having a great night. She was doing her chores. She was just hanging out. She was actually eating in the middle of eating dinner at the time when I did all these things. And so she went from this place of just like neutrality to like completely worse off than she began because of this wonderful thing that someone was trying to do for her. And this is how we are so often. Like we can have great things happen in our lives, and then one little thing is not right, and so we emphasize that, we latch onto that, and then it kind of spoils everything else. Instead, that's the gap, right? That's like when we understand that, it's like, we're in the gap here. How do we get out? We start counting our blessings. How do we get out of that? We start reframing things, and we start seeing like, man, like look where I started. I had nothing before this, and now I had this whole cool scavenger hunt, and I had this presents, and all the kids are excited, and like it can really help us get out of that gap thinking quicker.
Yeah, one of the gifts that my dad gave me before he passed was that sort of understanding that if people know that you're dying, that you're terminally ill, then they can tend to focus on that rather than celebrating your life, rather than building new memories. Um, and he very clearly, I found this out, I didn't find out that he was terminally ill and that he was going to, there was no coming back from, he had cancer in his liver, that there was no coming back from that. Um, until like just a month before he passed. And as sad as that is, he did that on purpose. He knew for a long time, but he wanted to, we didn't have a relationship my whole life. And that last year we got to have one. And he wanted me to have that relationship with him without knowing the depth or the severity of what was going on. He didn't want that gap thinking to be in the way of us building that relationship. And so I'm so grateful for that, because I didn't spend that year, mourning before it was time to mourn.
Yeah.
I spent that last year celebrating up until it was time to mourn.
And the great thing about this idea of the gap and the gain, we can use it to leverage our present, our future, and our past. And this is a really cool idea, because we all have traumatic events that kind of, we see them as defining moments in our lives. Like they can be things that we want to avoid completely now because we have bad experiences, or it's something that happened to our lives that that there's no I guess full recovery from. Like there's things that happen, we end up with battle scars, right? Emotional ones, physical ones. And a lot of times we see these things as these negative things that are holding us back. They can be our limiting ideas, and they can be part of those. And when we see that, we can use the same idea of the gap and the gain and see how those things have blessed us. Like see how we've become the people we are today because of those things, and how this adversity is actually a positive thing in all these different ways. And then sometimes those traumatic events can no longer have that bite. They no longer have those sting, because it's like I'm looking at all of the blessings, all of the things that happened that was a positive result out of that. You can take something, a traumatic event with your father, and you could say, I couldn't believe he didn't tell me about that. Like, why, how selfish of him, or whatever. You could have taken a different way. However, you choose to stay in the game with it. And you're like, I see how he was doing this. I understand why. And I'm so grateful that we had that time. And that is how we're able to reframe those things that could be bad experiences, or that could be traumatic for us. And we can then benefit from them, because now we're empowered. Like, all right, now I can, now that experience, I've learned so much, I've grown so much. Now I'm empowered to keep moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. And as we're going through and collecting the battle scars, one of the things that I would mention is that it's a lot easier to say than to actually get yourself to in that state of mind. It's easier to say you win or you learn. You,
Yeah.
you don't lose, than it is to actually feel like you've won or learned. When I'm
Yeah.
learning, I wish I was winning.
Yeah.
um, I mean, at times, like we just did our first, rented our first Toro, and Toro tells you, "Hey, we'll give you a special badge if you give unlimited mileage to your guests." And guests hardly ever, they don't ever abuse that, so don't worry about it. And so we're like, oh, okay. It's first time renting on Toro, so I put unlimited. Guess how many miles? So I learned I didn't win on my first Toro rental. Guess how many miles in 3 days my guest put on my car? Last time I will ever put unlimited miles.
What's that?
How many miles do you think is humanly possible to put on a car in 3 days?
1,500.
She put seriously 3,581 miles on the car. I had to get an oil change. An oil change after one rental. So I've learned my lesson, but and it is true. I wrote a review. I didn't give her a 5-star. I gave her a 3-star. Why? Because it's not her fault. Honestly, she did take advantage of the system. I think that there should be some communication if you're going to use the car for somebody's car for that sort of thing. Um, but I still gave her 3 stars because it was my fault. I need to own it. It was my fault. I listened to what Toro said, and I learned a lesson. I learned, hey, look, if you put unlimited miles,
That means
people are
unlimited.
yeah, people are gonna make it unlimited, and they're not gonna realize, they're not gonna think, oh, if I put unlimited miles on this car and I use, and I do an entire 4 months worth of driving in 3 days in the vehicle, that the host who's renting me this is really not making any money, because they're gonna go have to oil change the car. They're going to have to do all kinds of maintenance. I'm adding significant wear to the tires and all that stuff. But I could focus on that. Now, as you can tell, I've thought about it because I am thinking about it. So how do I focus on making it this is a learning and not a loss, but truly I win or I learn. I don't lose. And so that's what I've been working on for the last day, is getting my mind there. And the first thing is saying, okay, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to keep going back. I'm not going to go and allow, in my mind, there's like, man, I need to write a nasty letter to Toro. You told me that it was okay to do this and people wouldn't take advantage of me. And well, you know what? It wasn't their responsibility. It was mine.
Right.
And what I've learned is, hey, I will just put those proper boundaries on the use of my car in the future. And this is going to be a win for all of us. And in fact, I even would rent to this lady again. I mean, with the proper boundaries, if she wants to put that much mileage on my vehicle on a weekend, man, I'm going to make bank, because you don't get to put that many miles without paying, hefty fees if there's just a little bit of a boundary in place.
Yeah, and when we're looking at the gap and the gain and this whole idea, there is, there's a concept to this, but then there also are some techniques and tricks that you can do to really leverage the concept and utilize it to the best of your ability. And some of the things that to understand, I guess, from practicing it for the last several months, and even to the point where my 6-year-old can can articulate what the gap in the gain is. You see, when you have a cookie and you give half to me and half to my brother, and I'm mad that he has the bigger half, that's living in the gap. It's like, yes, you got it, Artie. You got it. And so like I talk to the kids about this, because this is one of the things. Teach other people who are close to you about the gap in the gain. Not only will it help their lives, but you can have them hold you accountable. It's like my 10-year-old Priscilla, she'll like, you're living in the gap, man, like get out of the gap. And so it's really cool to have the kids be participating in it. And it's not like an accusatory judgmental thing, but it's like, hey, you realize where you're at right now. It's like kind of it's a really great way to hold yourself accountable. Another thing that we are talking about here is like, you can't avoid going in the gap. Like you have to accept that it's going to happen, because it's just, there's peaks and valleys, right? And so in that sense, like we can't avoid having negative thoughts. We can't avoid negative things happening. We can't avoid those things. However, we can shorten the time that we're there. We can certainly do that, because if I look back in my past, and when I get into some kind of argument with a friend or my wife or something, it could take days to like sort everything out and get back to normal. And now I can, okay, I'm in the gap here. Like, what can I do about this? And like now I have tools, I have words to put to these things, and it's a really easy concept to visualize and start to turn around. And so don't resist going into the gap, because you will go there. There's no avoiding it, because one of the things that they talk about in the book is resisting going into the gap will actually take you into the gap. And so not resisting it, but just trying to be aware. And when you realize it, move out. Start being start practicing gratitude, start doing these things, tracking your wins, looking back at all the things that you've accomplished, and all the people that are supporting you, and all these things will help you move away from those gap thinking.
Yeah, I mean, and it's simply a matter of saying to yourself, having that internal dialogue and reasoning with yourself. I mean, I was tempted to be more upset than I needed to be, than was rational. I was tempted to, and I was in, and I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that I was in the gap for a little bit on that one, but it was a lot shorter. I mean, my time in the gap before having words to put on this was much longer in the past, and it was much harder to get to that place of gratitude and get to that place of, okay, you know what, I'm gonna of gratitude and optimism. Now, I think part of that comes because when someone has taken advantage of you or abused your trust or done something, there's that feeling of shame and that feeling of embarrassment, and those things, there's this sort of urge to get even, and that sort of thing. But in my self-talk, it was like that's absolutely fruitless. There's no benefit to me in it. In fact, it prolongs these feelings that I don't want. It prolongs this frame of mind that I don't want to be in. And so the best thing that I can do is to move through this as fast as possible.
Yeah.
I don't resist going into the gap. But when I'm in there, it's like, okay, let's start looking for ladders. Let's start looking for ways to climb out of this pit. And they're going to be, and as soon as you surrender to that, okay, you know what, I'm going to get out and above this and get back to focusing on the gain and get back to gratitude. It's amazing how easy it is to find the ladders to pull yourself out.
Yeah, and that internal dialogue you're talking about is so important. It's so important, because if you pay attention to it, we talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to our friends, right? Even our enemies, sometimes we talk to ourselves worse than that. And we have to be careful with that. And we have to make sure that we're not letting ourselves take us somewhere that we don't actually want to go. And when we're looking at this idea of going from the gap, realizing it and trying to work yourself out, be patient with yourself, especially in the beginning, because when we're looking at years, maybe even decades of a certain way of thinking, you can't just resolve that with a 30-minute podcast, right? It takes time, it takes effort, but it's something that the concept is so easy to understand. It's easy to dissect those things, identify it, and then start moving toward where you want to be. And the main things is gratitude and tracking your progress from where you were to where you are now. And this will keep you in the game rather than the gap.
Yeah. And I mean, there's not much to add to that. That's the perfect summary to put a bow on this. Yeah. So I'll just summarize what you said, and then we'll move to these crunchy, creamy, chewy affirmations. Gratitude is the key, and gratitude and being able to look at your wins and look at the fact that you have made progress, that you have gotten 1% better each day, that you're getting better and better each day. You can expect to get a little bit better tomorrow, and being able to continue to take that perspective and say, you know what, I'm going to focus on me becoming the best me that I can be. I'm going to focus on the fact that I'm having success and that I'm getting a little bit better each day. And yeah, I'm not perfect, and there are flaws that are following me, but they're falling off as I get better and better and better.
So,
And that's how you live in the game.
that's
So,
it.
all
Living
right,
in the game, baby.
let's go.
Let's do it.
All right. Because you know what, brother? I am committed to my growth.
I am committed to my growth.
I am loved, appreciated, blessed, and highly favored.
I am loved, appreciated, blessed, and highly favored.
Challenges or opportunities for me to improve.
Challenges or opportunities for me to improve.
Every day I am getting better and better.
Every day I am getting better and better.
I am my best investment.
I am my best investment.
Life happens for me. Everything is for my growth and benefit.
Life happens for me. Everything is for my growth and benefit.
I am an action taker.
I am an action taker.
I am committed to being the most positive person that I know.
I am committed to being the most positive person that I know.
I'm a fixer. I'm somebody's answer. When you get me, you get everything that I'm connected to.
I am a fixer. I am somebody's answer. When you get me, you get everything that I'm connected to.
You know what, Adam? I am healthy, wealthy, and wise.
I am healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Let's go.
Let's go.
All right, you all have an amazing Tuesday. It is going to be an amazing week. You're going to do amazing things. And even if you fail to meet a massive goal that you have for this week, remember to look at it from the perspective of the wins that you've had to get you there. And you'll have that massive win the week after or the week after that, but it's coming. Just keep trying.
Keep that win streak going. And for those who weren't that didn't hear yesterday, we are making a transition over to a new YouTube channel to avoid confusion. And so we are going to have a Growing Your Mindset. So you can find it at Growing Your Mindset on YouTube. I'm putting a link in the chat here. And so please go ahead and subscribe on there. Everything's going to be on there moving forward in the next few weeks. Thank you guys so much. I love you guys. Appreciate you.
We will see you guys in the next one.
In the next one. Peace.